Welcome back. All right, so it is the Stanley Cup Final getting started today. And when the Stanley Cup Final gets started, we have the press conference. Gary Bettman and Bill Daly answering questions from the press. There was a nice prelude to this with Marty Walsh talking about Hockey Fights Cancer, things that the NHL's doing in the community. And so that was nice. Then we get into the Bettman Daly part. It starts off with Gary Bettman reviewing what's happened this season, going through everything that's taken place, including the outdoor games and all that fun stuff. He also talked about the 2025 playoffs and the excitement of the first round and beyond, and doing what somebody who runs the league is going to do. They're going to tell you everything's going great, everybody's really happy, and you're obviously, at this point when you're setting up a press conference, going to start things off that way. I don't think I've ever seen a league's commissioner sit down and go, man, everything's kind of on fire right now, huh? It just doesn't happen. Now, he also says the CBA talks are going well. There's no deal done yet. He did seem to suggest that this is going along much better than previous negotiations when they've had CBA talks. And I don't see any reason why it won't. The players are going to get a record amount of money over the next few years. The escrow has dropped way off. That was a big talking point for the NHLers. And there's no reason at this point that either the owners or the players would want to shut things down. Everything's going pretty well. So I have no reason to think that we're not going to keep hockey going. I think the lockouts are done as long as we have that good relationship between the union and the National Hockey League. He also points to strong ratings for optimism regarding future growth, although I thought he cherry-picked here. Thought he cherry-picked the Game 7 from last year between Florida and Edmonton, and then he mentioned Four Nations and how the final got really big ratings. The ratings have been up on the Canadian side throughout these playoffs. They've been down on the American side, at least in that first round, and I saw some ratings news here and there. NHL ratings news is really not as readily available as one might think, but at any rate, he's obviously going to talk about the strong points, and so he points out where people have really been tuning in. So they got into the idea of expansion, and this is what I've been saying for years now. The NHL is not doing a formal expansion process. They don't need to. They've got markets where there's interest. People who've got pretty deep pockets have come in and had meetings with the National Hockey League. They're not going to have these meetings because they're not open to the idea of expanding. So basically the way this would work is that, let's say Atlanta, let's say the group with Anson Carter is part of it, and Atlanta goes, here's our formal process, our formal application to have an expansion team in Atlanta. That would then be gone over by the National Hockey League, and if it meets all their criteria of what they'd be looking for, and there's various criteria like market and, growth potential and all that fun stuff, it then would go to the Board of Governors, and the Board of Governors would vote on it. So we're not going to get a formal expansion process. It's not necessary. So this is just a way of kind of playing around with the language a little bit, so the National Hockey League can go, hey, we're not officially expanding. Although if you look, this year Utah was an expansion franchise, officially listed as an expansion franchise. Arizona was listed as inactive and still is last time I looked. So there's no reason to think the NHL's not open to expanding, even though that was probably done to keep Alex Morello, out of the whole process going to Utah and kind of, make sure that financially he's taken care of, which he was in that whole deal. Bettman jokingly blamed Pierre LeBrun for all the talk about his retirement, which I thought was great. Might have been the highlight of the whole thing. Bettman has a really good sense of humor, which is why I've never been nervous about the fake phone calls that they're fake. I'm sorry, I hate to tell you that. The Gary Bettman phone call videos I do on this channel every now and then. I've never been concerned that Bettman would find those things out and that I'd be, just blackballed by the National Hockey League. I've never had any concern about that. Bettman's got a pretty good sense of humor and basically said there is no plan in place for him to step down, and there's no talk of a replacement for him. He does admit, he's getting older, he's going to have to consider retirement, but that's not in the plans right now. No comment on the Hockey Canada trial, and I have not been covering all the details of that trial. They're waiting until it's done. Same thing that I'm doing. I'm waiting until it's done, until we have a verdict on it. It's been dramatic, and it has been terrifying at the same time for some of the details here and there, but I'm not getting into it until it's finished. And The NHL obviously is not going to tell us if there's a not guilty verdict, what that would mean for the players that are the defendants in this case. So yeah, there's not any news to report there other than they're keeping an eye on it, and we'll see what happens when it's all done. They had praise for the PWHL when question was asked about the PWHL's rules process. Bettman going out of his way to say PWHL is doing really well through its first 2 seasons, and it is. It's generating some money. But there's been no talk of changing any of the rules in the National Hockey League based on the PWHL. The rule everybody likes in the PWHL is that when a shorthanded goal is scored, it ends the power play. It's the jailbreak rule. I did get a kick out of, I can't remember which reporter it was that asked, but he said 30% of NHL fans would like to see that change happen. And Bettman goes, so 70% said no. You know, and I will admit, I'd be a no. I would not change that rule. I think that, yes, a shorthanded goal getting scored is fine, but I don't think the jailbreak rule works in the National Hockey League. If it works in the PWHL, great. I would not want to see that in the National Hockey League. Just me personally. And at this point, the NHL seems to agree that they're not making any changes based on what another league's doing at this time. There have been talks about changes to the CHL rule, but that's tricky. So the idea that if a player's 18 or 19 years of age and they can't make it onto an NHL club, you have to return them to juniors, that's been an argument for a long time. And I don't see anything changing there because the CHL is very protective of that rule. And there's been talks, but there's no change at this point in time. So maybe it changes. Definitely the CHL players being able to go to the NCAA will complicate things, but there's been no talk of changing it so that, and my argument's always been that a team should be allowed to keep one player. One player, that's it. One player who's 18 or 19, who they have signed to a contract, and they decide, we think this player's better served by being in the American Hockey League than by being in juniors. I think that would be a fine amendment. I don't think that handicaps the junior leagues so much, but that's the concern in juniors, is that all of their talented top-end 18 and 19-year-olds would be up with the NHL, and they would basically just have all their stars leaving every year, which I understand that concern, but at this point in time, nothing's changed anyways. They're still working on plans they're still working on plans for, there's the word I'm looking for, the 2026 AllStar Break. So there's an AllStar Break before Milan, which I don't understand. To be completely honest, I wouldn't have a break before the Olympics because all these players want to go to the Olympics. And that's what they're saying. Basically, if you read between the lines, players don't want to get hurt before the Olympics. So whatever the NHL has planned for the All-Star Weekend in 2026 has to also make sure nobody gets hurt. That's the tricky part there. So they're still working on what that 2026 break is going to look like, and they admit they really raised the bar with 4 nations. It's difficult to do anything like that right before an Olympic break where everybody's going to want to go to the Olympics. There is no plan for a play-in round. I thought it was funny they asked this question. I thought, as long as Bettman's in charge, you're not getting a play-in round. And I agree. The playoffs are long enough. The regular season's long enough. I don't think in hockey, after an 82-game schedule, we need a play-in to decide who does or doesn't make it. I don't like it. I think it would also kill the trade deadline, because now all of a sudden you'd have more teams to be like, actually, we're kind of in this because we could get to the play-in. I really would rather that the NHL just leaves it at 16 teams make it and just that's it. I think expanding the playoffs would be a mistake. I'm honestly, that's my honest belief on that. The decentralized draft. So there's been talk about them going back to the standard draft next year after last year's draft was so popular from Las Vegas. But they're saying it's not up to the National Hockey League. It's up to the franchises. So if after this year's decentralized, meaning that most of the management guys are going to be back home and just conducting it over Zoom, if that's not popular with the teams, if they decide, you know what, we want to go back to the normal draft, it'll be up to the teams. The National Hockey League is not going to make them do something they don't want to do. So if a majority of teams say this decentralized thing's much easier, it's cheaper, it's better for us, then we keep that. And we'll stick with the decentralized draft. Some teams are concerned about the tax issue. So we've been talking about this a lot. Florida's back in the final. A lot of discussion about Florida. Bill Daly took this one, and he basically said that the NHL disagrees that it's a major issue right now. It's something they're keeping an eye on. But he also pointed out there are a lot of reasons why a player might want to sign with a team or not. Different markets have different advantages. Yes, there's a tax advantage in certain places, but a player might want to play for a certain coach. They might want to play somewhere where they feel like have a chance to win the cup, this kind of thing. And so there's nothing in CBA talks right now about changing it. Though there are some teams that are concerned about it. I wouldn't be surprised if the Canucks are one of those teams that's concerned about it. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if a number of Canadian teams are worried about it, but others as well, right? So they're not worried about differences in the markets, including with taxes, but it is something they're aware of. And I do think that when the salary cap is up into that $113 million region, I do think they're going to have to do something, because at that point, it's a significant amount of money that would be different between a team in Vancouver, in Montreal, and what they can pay a player and how that all works out after taxes versus Florida, Nashville, Dallas. Florida always gets mentioned, but Nashville, Dallas, Seattle, these are teams that you don't have to worry about the state tax either. And no plans are in place to lengthen regular season overtime. That'd have to be in the CBA, and the Players Association would have to agree to it. There's been talk of expanding overtime to 7 minutes, but Bettman pointed out that I think he said 72% of games, they're resolved in overtime before we get to the shootout. And this year was like that. This year we had a lot of games that were resolved in overtime, but it's not like that every year. So it doesn't sound like there's any plans to lengthen the regular season's overtime, and they did say there will never be a discussion of changing overtime in the playoffs. I could not possibly agree more. The idea of making any kind of change to the playoff format in the NHL, just every time Mike Milbury'd be on there as NBC, right? And he'd be griping if a game went into double overtime. But I don't know why they don't just, play 3-on-3 and have a shootout from here. Oh my gosh, no. How no? No, I can't. It just made my brain explode. And then I have to put it back into my head and try to do a video after. It's part of the reason I forget things all the time. But at any rate, there's no changes coming to that. And for all the notes on the board, all the discussion time we've had, the one thing I would say we learned today is they're not officially in an expansion process, but they're quietly in an expansion process. They're just not letting everybody know at this point in time, because the cities that they want to expand to are very likely the cities they're already in talks with. So look at Houston, look at Atlanta, because those are the two that they've had talks with that we know about not too long ago. But there are probably some other locations as well. So we shall see. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. As always, hit like and subscribe in the event that you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.